The galaxy had a long memory, and some places earned reputations so terrifying that even seasoned explorers refused to speak their names aloud. Planet NX-731 was one of those places. Officially catalogued as a temperate ocean world in the outer reaches of Coalition space, it had once been considered a scientific treasure. That changed 83 years ago when the exploration vessel Silver Horizon descended through its atmosphere and vanished without a trace. The crew numbered 46, representing 7 different civilizations. No distress signal was ever received. A year later, a heavily armed rescue cruiser followed the exact flight path, only for its communications to cut off mid-transmission. More rescue missions followed, each equipped with stronger shields, better weapons, and more experienced crews. None returned. Satellites sent into orbit malfunctioned within hours, while long-range probes either crashed into the oceans or disappeared completely. Eventually, the Galactic Coalition sealed the system, classified every report, and gave the world a new name whispered across academies and military bases alike: the No-Return Planet. For decades, NX-731 became a warning rather than a destination. Veteran captains altered their routes to avoid even passing through its sector. Survival instructors used it as an example of the one place where courage alone meant nothing. Countless theories emerged. Some believed an ancient civilization still defended the planet. Others claimed invisible predators lurked beneath its endless oceans. A few insisted the planet itself was alive and consumed anything that landed upon it. None of those theories could be proven, because there was never anyone left to tell the truth. Thousands of light years away, inside the enormous Galactic Coalition military academy orbiting the peaceful world of Asterion Prime, cadets from more than 100 intelligent species trained together beneath one roof. Towering reptilian warriors practiced beside agile insectoid pilots. Crystalline beings attended strategy lectures with amphibious engineers, and every corridor echoed with dozens of languages translated instantly through neural communicators. Humanity had joined the coalition only 12 years earlier. Their arrival had been welcomed officially, but many older civilizations quietly viewed humans as impulsive newcomers who relied too much on instinct and luck. They were tolerated, not respected. Among the graduating class was 22-year-old Ethan Cross, a human cadet whose record confused nearly every instructor. He never finished first in combat simulations. He wasn't the strongest marksman, nor the fastest pilot. Yet whenever training shifted into wilderness survival, resource management, or emergency adaptation, Ethan consistently outperformed cadets with far superior technology. His instructors often joked that if every machine in the galaxy suddenly stopped working, Ethan would somehow be the only one who would still manage to eat dinner. That unusual talent had little to do with military training and everything to do with his childhood. Ethan had grown up on the frontier colony of Haven's Reach, where advanced equipment frequently failed because supply ships arrived only a few times each year. His father, Daniel Cross, believed technology should help people rather than replace common sense. Every weekend, he took young Ethan to the rivers surrounding their settlement. "You don't catch fish by forcing the river," Daniel would often say while quietly repairing a fishing line. "You watch, you listen. Nature always tells you what it's doing. Most people are simply too impatient to notice." Young Ethan had once frowned while staring at calm water. "But what if nothing happens?" His father smiled without looking up. "Then you've learned patience. That's never wasted." Those lessons remained with Ethan long after his father's death during a mining accident several years later. Whenever academy life became overwhelming, Ethan found himself remembering quiet mornings beside those rivers instead of battle drills or tactical lectures. On the morning of the graduation assignments, thousands of cadets gathered inside the academy's massive central auditorium. Transparent holographic displays floated above the audience while instructors called names one after another. Every cadet would receive a final field examination before officially earning coalition service commissions. Some would command small reconnaissance teams. Others would survive alone on controlled wilderness worlds. Every assignment was dangerous, but carefully calculated. Ethan sat quietly beside his closest friend, an energetic blue-skinned alien named Kale, whose species possessed 4 slender arms and remarkably expressive eyes. Kale leaned closer and whispered, "Relax. Worst case, they send us to some frozen moon for 2 weeks." Ethan chuckled. "Knowing my luck, probably somewhere full of poisonous insects. I'd take insects over Professor Varrix's survival lectures. You only say that because you slept through half of them." "I was meditating. You were snoring." Before Kale could defend himself, the auditorium lights dimmed. Commandant Seraphis, an imposing silver-feathered avian officer, stepped onto the central platform. His deep voice carried effortlessly across the enormous chamber. "Cadets, today you cease being students. Your final assignment will determine not only your graduation, but your future within the Coalition. Remember this above all else. Technology may fail, allies may fall, but discipline must never abandon you." One by one, assignments appeared above each cadet's head. Cheers erupted as teams learned their destinations. Several elite cadets received prestigious exploration missions. Others looked nervous but determined. Then the hall suddenly fell silent. The holographic display flickered. Ethan Cross. Every eye turned toward the lone human. Instead of displaying a routine assignment, the screen glowed crimson. "Special authorization required." Murmurs spread instantly across the audience. "What is this? That's never happened before. Is the system malfunctioning?" Even Commandant Seraphis frowned. Several senior officers quietly exchanged uneasy glances before a heavily decorated Coalition admiral stood from the observation balcony. "Cadet Ethan Cross," the admiral announced, his voice unusually formal. "Your assignment has been amended by unanimous decision of the High Strategic Council." Kale blinked in disbelief. "Amended? Since when did they change graduation trials?" No one answered. The hologram shifted once more. A rotating image of a blue-green ocean planet appeared. Large crimson letters materialized beneath it. NX 731. The no-return planet. The auditorium became deathly quiet. Someone in the back whispered, "That's impossible." Another cadet muttered, "They're sending him there." Kale stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "This has to be a mistake." "It isn't," the admiral replied calmly. Kale stared in disbelief. "No one survives NX 731. The admiral's expression never changed. "That is precisely why this mission has strategic importance." Ethan slowly rose from his seat. "Permission to ask a question, sir?" "Granted. Am I expected to explore the planet? Or simply survive?" For the first time, a faint smile crossed the admiral's face. "If you survive long enough to ask that question again, Cadet Cross, I believe the Coalition will consider the mission an extraordinary success." The answer sent another wave of whispers through the auditorium. Ethan understood exactly what had happened. Officially, this was a graduation assignment. Unofficially, he had been chosen because no one expected him to come back. Instead of arguing, Ethan inhaled slowly, remembering his father's quiet voice beside the river. "Panic wastes energy. Observe first." He straightened his uniform and nodded. "I accept the assignment." Across the auditorium, many cadets looked at him with sympathy. Others looked relieved that they hadn't been chosen. High above them, several senior officials watched silently, each carrying their own reasons for approving the mission. None of them noticed that hidden deep within classified archives, long dormant sensors orbiting NX 731 had just detected a new inbound vessel. And for the first time in nearly a century, something beneath the planet's endless oceans had begun to awaken. The assignment spread across the academy faster than any official announcement ever could. By the time Ethan left the auditorium, whispers followed him through every corridor. Cadets who had barely acknowledged the human during 3 years of training suddenly stopped their conversations as he passed. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity, while a few simply shook their heads, convinced they had just witnessed a public execution disguised as a graduation exercise. Ethan ignored them all. There was no point wasting energy on rumors when he had less than 12 hours before departure. Kale caught up with him outside the equipment wing, breathing heavily after pushing through the crowded hallway. Ethan, wait! Ethan stopped beside a large observation window overlooking the Academy's docking bays. Hundreds of sleek starships rested beneath the transparent dome, each preparing for different assignments. Kale stared at him with disbelief. Tell me you're planning to refuse the mission. Ethan smiled faintly. Can I? No, Kale admitted reluctantly. Then there's my answer. Kale folded two of his forearms across his chest while the other two gestured in frustration. This isn't fair. Graduation trials are supposed to test us, not kill us. Even Professor Varix looked uncomfortable. Ethan leaned against the railing and looked down at the hangars below. Have you ever noticed something strange about the Coalition? Kale frowned. What do you mean? Everyone keeps saying humans rely on luck. Maybe this is their way of proving whether that's true. Kale sighed. Or proving humans are expendable. Ethan remained silent because deep down he had reached the same conclusion. Several minutes later, Ethan entered the Academy's survival equipment depot. The massive warehouse contained rows upon rows of expedition gear ranging from portable shelters and atmospheric analyzers to plasma tools and emergency medical kits. Every graduating cadet received a standard equipment package customized for their assigned mission. An elderly quartermaster named Relis, a reptilian veteran with countless scars across his scales, scanned Ethan's assignment file. His expression changed almost immediately. NX 731? He muttered quietly. I thought those files were permanently sealed. He looked up at Ethan before closing the datapad. Wait here. Instead of issuing the standard survival pack, Relis disappeared into a restricted storage room. Several minutes later he returned carrying an older, reinforced backpack that looked far more worn than the polished equipment surrounding it. He carefully placed it on the counter. This isn't regulation issue, he said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Then why give it to me? Relis shrugged. Because regulations weren't written for planets like yours. The old quartermaster began unpacking the contents one by one. High-density thermal blanket, manual water purifier, mechanical fishing line. Ethan blinked. Fishing line? It doesn't require power, Relis answered. Electronics fail. Gravity generators fail. Batteries fail. A simple hook rarely does. Ethan smiled slightly as he picked up the compact reel. It reminded him of the equipment his father used back home. Relis noticed the expression. You've used one before? Since I was 6. Good. That may end up saving your life. The quartermaster continued placing additional items into the pack. Emergency knife. Solar cooking plate. Rope. Basic repair kit. 2 weeks of survival rations. Ethan examined everything carefully before asking, why are you helping me? Relis looked toward the warehouse entrance to make sure nobody was listening. 30 years ago, I helped prepare equipment for the second rescue mission to NX 731. His voice became quieter. Every one of them was convinced superior weapons would solve the mystery. None returned. Don't make their mistake. Ethan nodded respectfully. What should I do instead? The veteran answered without hesitation. Observe before acting. Survive before exploring. As Ethan left the depot, he nearly collided with Professor Varix, the Academy's notoriously strict survival instructor. The towering insectoid folded his long arms behind his back. Cadet Cross. Professor. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally, Varix extended a small rectangular device. Take this. Ethan accepted it cautiously. A field recorder? Yes, I already have one in my standard kit. Not like this one. Varix's compound eyes reflected the corridor lights. Its memory storage is independent of coalition networks. Even if communication systems fail, it will continue recording. Ethan looked confused. Why give it to me? The professor answered in his usual emotionless tone. Knowledge survives only if someone records it. Ethan slipped the recorder into his pocket. You think I won't come back? Varix remained silent for a moment before replying. I think every civilization underestimates nature. Humans simply underestimate it differently. Ethan laughed softly. I'll take that as encouragement. As he turned to leave, the professor spoke again. Cadet. Ethan stopped. Your survival scores were never exceptional because of strength. Then why? Because unlike most cadets, you know when not to fight. Without another word, the professor walked away. That evening, Ethan sat alone inside his small dormitory room, carefully organizing every piece of equipment. He placed heavier tools close to his back, balanced emergency supplies evenly, and waterproofed anything vulnerable to moisture. The fishing line received a dedicated pocket near the top of the pack. Looking at it brought back another memory from childhood. He could almost hear his father's voice again. The biggest mistake people make in the wilderness isn't running out of food, Daniel had once said while entangling a fishing line. It's assuming they'll find food tomorrow. Always prepare today. Ethan quietly repeated the sentence to himself while securing the last compartment. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. When the door opened, Kale stepped inside carrying a small metal container. I figured you'd skip dinner. Ethan accepted the container and opened it. Inside were warm meat pies from the academy cafeteria, his favorite meal. You didn't have to do this. Kale smiled weakly. Maybe not, but someone has to make sure you don't starve before reaching the planet. Ethan laughed. Thanks. They spent the next hour talking about ordinary things instead of impossible missions. Old training accidents, embarrassing classroom moments, the time Kale accidentally piloted a drone into the commandant's office. Neither mentioned NX-731 again. Later that night, as artificial stars illuminated the academy's transparent dome, Ethan stood alone in the observation garden overlooking space. Endless stars stretched across the darkness, peaceful and silent. Footsteps approached behind him. Commandant Seraphis stopped beside the young human without saying anything for several moments. Finally, the commandant spoke. You're wondering why you were chosen. Ethan nodded. A little. Would knowing the answer change anything? Ethan considered the question before shaking his head. No, sir. Then focus on what you can change. The commandant handed Ethan a sealed authorization chip. This contains classified orbital maps of NX-731 gathered over the last 80 years. Ethan accepted it carefully. There isn't much information, Seraphis admitted. Most satellites stopped transmitting shortly after deployment. Ethan looked at the tiny data chip. So the maps might already be wrong. Probably. Then why give them to me? The commandant's stern expression softened ever so slightly. Because every explorer deserves at least one advantage, no matter how small. Hours later, the Academy's launch alarms echoed through the docking bays. Ethan walked toward Shuttle 12 carrying everything he would need to survive. Through the observation windows, hundreds of cadets watched silently. Some saluted, others simply stood in respectful silence. As the hangar doors began opening toward the stars, Ethan climbed into the cockpit, secured his harness, and glanced one final time at the academy that had been his home for 3 years. The engines ignited with a deep metallic roar, and moments later the shuttle accelerated into the darkness, carrying one human cadet toward the most feared planet in the known galaxy, completely unaware that something ancient had already detected his arrival and was patiently waiting beneath an endless ocean. The journey to NX-731 took nearly 6 days through Coalition jump corridors, giving Ethan far too much time to think. Unlike ordinary troop transports filled with chatter and activity, Shuttle 12 carried only one passenger. The silence inside the compact vessel became almost tangible, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional voice of the onboard navigation computer. Ethan spent the first 2 days reviewing every classified file Commandant Seraphis had authorized. Unfortunately, there was very little to learn. Satellite images showed endless blue oceans interrupted by scattered continents covered in dense forests and towering mountain ranges. Climate readings suggested breathable air, moderate temperatures, and abundant fresh water. On paper, it looked like one of the most habitable planets ever discovered. The reports became increasingly frustrating after that. Every page ended with the same conclusion. Data unavailable. Signal lost. Expedition missing. After reading the final classified document, Ethan closed the display and muttered, 83 years of investigation. and nobody knows any more than the first team did. The navigation computer responded in its calm synthetic voice. Correction. Probability analysis indicates the coalition knows approximately 4% more than the initial expedition. Ethan laughed despite himself. Only 4%? Affirmative. Current mission success probability remains at 8.3%. Ethan leaned back in his seat. You're not very encouraging. Encouragement is not included in my operational programming. Clearly. The computer paused for a fraction of a second. However, survival probabilities increase when the passenger maintains psychological stability. Ethan smirked. Was that your version of motivation? Possibly. Even in the middle of a mission everyone expected him to lose, Ethan appreciated the unintended humor. On the morning of the 6th day, warning lights illuminated the cockpit as the shuttle emerged from hyperspace. The navigation computer announced, "Destination system reached. Planet NX 731 entering visual range." The forward display brightened, revealing an enormous blue-green world suspended against the darkness of space. Vast oceans shimmered beneath swirling white clouds, while massive continents stretched across the horizon like emerald islands floating in an endless sea. Ethan couldn't help staring in amazement. "This is the no-return planet?" he whispered. It looked almost peaceful, beautiful, even. Nothing about it suggested death or mystery. As the shuttle approached orbital altitude, Ethan activated long-range scanners. Almost immediately, error messages flooded the display. Navigation relay offline. Orbital mapping unavailable. Satellite synchronization failed. Ethan frowned. "Computer, run a manual scan." Several tense seconds passed before the reply came. "Unable to establish stable sensor lock. Electromagnetic interference increasing." Ethan glanced toward the planet. "Natural storm? Negative. Interference pattern is artificial." That single word made Ethan sit upright. Artificial. Before he could investigate further, every alarm inside the cockpit erupted simultaneously. A sharp warning tone echoed through the cabin as bright red lights flashed overhead. "Critical alert," the computer announced. "High-energy object detected." Ethan quickly searched the radar display but saw nothing. "Where?" "Unknown. Object not visible on conventional sensors." A second later the entire shuttle shuddered violently. Something invisible slammed into the vessel with incredible force, throwing Ethan against his restraints. Sparks erupted from the control panel as warning messages multiplied faster than he could read them. "What hit us?" Ethan shouted. "Energy signature unknown." Another impact struck the shuttle, this time tearing through the port engine. The vessel spun uncontrollably as flames burst from damaged systems. Ethan fought desperately to stabilize the controls, but every input produced another cascade of errors. Engine failure. Flight stabilization offline. Reactor containment compromised. The computer's normally calm voice became urgent. "Emergency escape sequence recommended." Ethan's hands flew across the control panel. "If I eject now, I'll lose the shuttle. Remaining aboard will reduce survival probability to 0. That was enough. He slammed the emergency release. Explosive bolts detonated beneath his seat, launching the compact escape pod away from the crippled shuttle just seconds before the main craft exploded in a brilliant sphere of blue fire. The shockwave hurled the pod violently toward the planet below. Through the small viewing window, Ethan watched helplessly as the remains of Shuttle 12 scattered across the upper atmosphere like burning meteors. The pod entered the atmosphere at terrifying speed. Its heat shield glowed bright orange as friction transformed the surrounding air into a roaring inferno. Warning sirens echoed continuously while the tiny craft shook so violently Ethan could barely see the instruments. "Deploy stabilization fins," he ordered. No response. "Manual control." No response. "Anything still works?" After a brief pause, the computer answered. "Seat restraints remain fully operational." Ethan couldn't help laughing. "Glad something does." Lightning flashed outside the pod as it plunged through thick storm clouds. Below, endless blue water filled the horizon. The POD's guidance system attempted to steer toward a nearby coastline but failed repeatedly. Impact predicted in The computer paused, 21 seconds. Ethan tightened his harness. The ocean rushed upward with frightening speed. The escape pod slammed into the surface like a meteor. The impact felt like crashing into solid rock. Water exploded around the capsule as it skipped across the waves several times before finally plunging beneath the surface. Ethan's vision blurred from the force of the collision. Ice-cold water began leaking through damaged seals almost immediately. "Cabin flooding," the computer announced. "I noticed," Ethan grunted as he struggled against the restraints. The pod sank deeper. Outside the small window, sunlight faded into dark blue shadows. Water reached his knees, then his waist. The emergency release mechanism refused to activate. Ethan grabbed the survival knife attached to his belt and jammed it into the damaged control panel, prying desperately until the locking bolts finally snapped loose. The hatch burst open. Freezing water rushed inside with overwhelming force, dragging Ethan into the dark depths. For several terrifying seconds he had no idea which direction led to the surface. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but another memory surfaced through the chaos. Never fight water in a panic, his father had once told him while teaching him to swim across a strong river current. Find the light first, then swim. Ethan forced himself to stop struggling. He looked upward. A faint shimmer of sunlight filtered through the water. He kicked toward it with everything he had. Moments later he burst onto the surface, gasping desperately for air. The wreckage of the escape pod floated nearby before slowly disappearing beneath the waves. Far ahead, perhaps 200 meters away, lay a narrow strip of rocky shoreline. Ethan began swimming. Every stroke felt heavier than the last as exhaustion crept into his muscles. Twice he nearly stopped. Twice he remembered his father telling him, "The shore only belongs to those who keep moving." Nearly 20 minutes later, Ethan collapsed onto wet sand, coughing seawater onto the beach. He lay there staring at the unfamiliar sky for several minutes before finally sitting up. The landscape around him was breathtaking. Crystal clear water stretched toward the horizon. Towering evergreen forests covered nearby hills. Snow-capped mountains shimmered in the distance beneath golden afternoon sunlight. Bird-like creatures with brilliant blue wings circled overhead, their melodic calls echoing across the shoreline. It was the last place in the galaxy that looked capable of swallowing entire expeditions. Ethan slowly checked his equipment. His backpack had remained attached throughout the crash. The survival supplies were mostly intact. The field recorder still functioned. His emergency communicator, however, displayed only one message: long-range transmitter destroyed. He looked toward the empty sky and exhaled slowly. No rescue signal. The realization settled over him like a heavy weight. Nobody knew exactly where he had landed. Nobody could hear him. From this moment onward, every decision would determine whether he lived long enough to see another sunrise. As the sun dipped lower over the tranquil ocean, Ethan failed to notice something else. Far beyond the calm waves, almost a kilometer offshore, a massive shadow silently emerged beneath the water's surface. Two enormous glowing eyes opened in the darkness, fixed unblinkingly on the lone human standing on the beach, as if the planet itself had just taken notice of its newest visitor. The sun had almost disappeared behind the distant mountains when Ethan finally forced himself to stop staring at the ocean. He had survived the crash, but surviving the night would require far more than luck. Every survival lesson he had ever learned echoed through his mind. Food could wait, answers could wait, curiosity could wait, shelter came first. He turned away from the shoreline and studied the terrain with careful eyes. About 100 meters inland, a rocky hillside rose above the beach, offering protection from wind and a clear view of the surrounding area. Dense evergreen trees surrounded its base, while a narrow stream flowed down toward the sea. High ground, fresh water, and cover, Ethan murmured. Dad would have picked the same spot. He climbed the slope cautiously, constantly scanning the forest around him. Every plant looked unfamiliar, but several resembled Earth's pine trees enough to provide dry branches for a fire. Strange purple flowers covered patches of grass, releasing tiny glowing spores whenever the wind touched them. Insects the size of dragonflies hovered silently between the trees, their transparent wings shimmering with rainbow colors. The entire forest felt alive, yet strangely peaceful. There were no growls, no predator calls, no signs of immediate danger. That silence bothered Ethan more than loud noises would have. Predators usually announced themselves. Intelligent hunters did not. Reaching a flat section of rock overlooking the beach, Ethan dropped his backpack and immediately began working. He collected fallen branches, arranged them into a simple lean to shelter against the cliff face, then secured the frame using the rope Rellies had packed for him. It wasn't comfortable, but it would keep the night wind off him. Next came fire. Fortunately, his emergency kit contained a manual ignition tool that didn't rely on electronics. After several minutes of effort, tiny sparks finally caught the dry moss beneath the branches. Thin smoke curled upward before bright orange flames sprang to life. Ethan stretched his hands toward the warmth and smiled with quiet satisfaction. One problem solved. Darkness spread quickly across the planet. Unlike Earth, NX 731 possessed two small moons, both rising together above the ocean. Their pale blue light reflected across the water, transforming the entire coastline into a sea of silver. Ethan heated one of his emergency ration packs over the fire before eating slowly. He knew the supplies would last only about 2 weeks if carefully rationed. After that, the planet itself would have to provide everything. Looking toward the endless ocean, he sighed. Guess I'll be fishing sooner than I expected. The thought reminded him of Professor Barricks's recorder. Ethan reached into his backpack and removed the compact device. A small green light indicated it had survived the crash. He hesitated for a moment before pressing the record button. The tiny camera activated with a soft beep. Field log. Day 1, Ethan began. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Well, if anyone ever watches this, then either I made it home, or somebody eventually found the recorder. He chuckled quietly. For now, status report. Shuttle destroyed before landing. Long-range communications are gone. Basic survival equipment survived. Planet appears breathable. Climate is mild, and I haven't been eaten yet, which I suppose counts as progress. He glanced toward the fire. Current objective. Survive the night. Locate sustainable food and water tomorrow. Then figure out why this place scares an entire galaxy. He stopped recording and smiled to himself. Not exactly inspirational. Unknown to Ethan, the recorder automatically attempted to synchronize its backup memory with any available coalition signal. The damaged transmission barely escaped the planet's interference, fragmented into meaningless bursts of static before disappearing into deep space. Thousands of light years away, inside the Coalition Military Academy's communication center, a technician suddenly frowned at one of his consoles. Commander, I'm detecting something. A senior communications officer walked over. From where? The technician enlarged the signal. Source matches Shuttle 12's recorder frequency. The officer's eyes widened. Play it. The speakers crackled with heavy static. Most of the recording was completely unintelligible. Then, for just a few seconds, Ethan's voice became clear. Haven't been eaten yet. Counts as progress. The transmission immediately dissolved back into static before ending altogether. Silence filled the control room. One technician finally blinked. Did he just joke? The communications officer stared at the frozen waveform. On the no-return planet? Nobody knew what to say. Back on NX 731, Ethan had no idea anyone had heard him. He sat beside the fire studying a simple map he'd sketched from memory after descending through the atmosphere. Without orbital data, he had no way of knowing where he was on the planet. Tomorrow, he whispered, find higher ground. Before he could continue planning, a faint splash echoed from the beach below. Ethan instantly froze. Another splash followed. Slow, heavy, something large was moving through the shallow water. He quietly picked up his survival knife and extinguished the fire by covering it with dirt, allowing darkness to hide his position. Remaining low behind the rocks, he slowly crawled toward the edge of the overlook. The beach below appeared empty. Then the moonlight caught movement. Far out in the water, two enormous glowing blue eyes floated just above the surface. They were impossibly far apart. Whatever owned them had to be massive. The creature remained perfectly still, watching, not attacking, just watching. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. "What are you?" he whispered. As if responding to his voice, the glowing eyes slowly disappeared beneath the water without making another sound. The ocean became calm once again. He remained motionless for several minutes before finally relaxing. "It knows I'm here." The realization sent a chill through him. Most predators attacked when they found prey. This one had simply observed him. That suggested intelligence, or patience. Neither possibility was comforting. Eventually, exhaustion overcame caution. Ethan returned to his shelter but slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound carried by the night wind. Hours passed before the first rays of sunlight crept over the mountains. Morning transformed the mysterious coastline into a paradise once again. Birds sang from the treetops, gentle waves rolled onto the beach, and the terrifying eyes from the previous night seemed almost impossible to believe. After eating a small breakfast from his remaining rations, Ethan refilled his water container from the nearby stream. Basic testing strips indicated the water contained no immediately harmful chemicals or pathogens. "That's one less problem," he said, clipping the container onto his backpack. Now came the larger challenge, finding renewable food. He removed the mechanical fishing line Rellies had insisted he take. The simple reel felt wonderfully familiar in his hands. Smiling, Ethan walked down to a cluster of smooth rocks extending into the sea. He searched the shoreline for bait and found several worm-like creatures beneath damp stones. "Not exactly what Dad used," he laughed, "but fish here probably aren't picky." He attached the strange bait to the hook and cast the line into the clear blue water with practiced ease. The lure splashed gently into the shallows before slowly sinking out of sight. Ethan settled onto a nearby rock, relaxed his shoulders, and watched the line. Minutes passed peacefully. The ocean remained calm. A warm breeze drifted across the shoreline. For the first time since arriving, Ethan almost forgot he was stranded on the most feared planet in the galaxy. Then the fishing line suddenly jerked so violently that the reel nearly flew out of his hands. Whoa! He dug his boots against the rocks and pulled back with all his strength. Whatever had taken the bait wasn't just large. It was pulling him toward the water. The fishing rod bent so sharply that Ethan thought it would snap in half. The line screamed through the reel as whatever had taken the bait surged deeper into the crystal-clear water with astonishing strength. "Easy. Easy," he muttered through clenched teeth, planting his boots firmly against the rocks. Years of fishing on Haven's Reach had taught him one important lesson: never fight a powerful fish head-on. Let it tire itself first. He loosened the drag slightly, allowing the creature to pull line while maintaining steady pressure. "You're stronger than you look," he laughed nervously. "But so is this old reel." For nearly 5 minutes, the unseen creature dragged him back and forth along the shoreline. Every time Ethan gained a few meters of line, it surged away again with explosive force. Sweat rolled down his forehead despite the cool sea breeze. Finally, the resistance began to weaken. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "Now you're getting tired." Slowly, meter by meter, he reeled the creature toward the shallows. The water suddenly erupted in a spray of foam. Instead of a fish, a sleek blue-gray animal nearly the size of a wolf leapt into the air. It had smooth amphibious skin, 4 powerful legs ending in webbed claws, a long muscular tail, and bright silver eyes filled with intelligence. Rows of tiny fins ran along its back like folded sails, while faint turquoise patterns glowed beneath its skin whenever sunlight struck the scales around its neck. It wasn't trying to attack Ethan. It was simply trying to escape the hook. "What in the galaxy?" Ethan gasped. The creature twisted violently, and the hook slipped free before it splashed back into the water. It floated there for a moment, staring directly at Ethan with curious eyes. You aren't a fish. The animal tilted its head as though trying to understand him. Then, with surprising speed, it darted forward, grabbed the bait bucket sitting beside Ethan, and disappeared beneath the waves. For a second, Ethan simply blinked. Then he burst out laughing. You stole my bait. His voice echoed across the quiet bay. Unbelievable. Shaking his head, Ethan packed away the fishing line and searched beneath nearby rocks for more bait. Well, he muttered, guess somebody else likes fishing too. An hour later, after replacing the stolen bait, Ethan cast his line again. This time the catch was exactly what he expected. A long silver fish with shimmering violet stripes bit the hook. It struggled fiercely but was nowhere near as powerful as the mysterious amphibious creature. After carefully dispatching it, Ethan examined the fish using his survival scanner. The display flashed, organic composition compatible, no immediate toxic compounds detected, cooking recommended. Finally, Ethan smiled. Real food. Back at his campsite, he cleaned the fish beside the stream before roasting it over the fire. The rich aroma filled the air, making him realize just how hungry he had become. Before taking his first bite, he reached for Professor Barricks's recorder. The tiny camera blinked to life. Field log. Day 2. Ethan held up the cooked fish with a grin. Good news. Alien fish appear edible. Bad news. Apparently they aren't the only things interested in fishing around here. He chuckled. Met some kind of amphibious animal today. About this big. He stretched out his arms. Stole my entire bait supply without so much as saying thank you. He laughed again. If anyone ever watches this, bring extra bait. He stopped recording and finally tasted the fish. His eyebrows immediately rose. That's actually incredible. The meat was tender, slightly sweet, and unlike anything he had ever eaten. I've had worse meals at the Academy cafeteria. Thousands of light years away, inside the Coalition Communications Center, another fragmented burst of Ethan's recording slipped through the planet's interference. Officers gathered around the monitor as static slowly gave way to clear audio. Alien fish appear edible. The image flickered. Stole my entire bait supply. Static swallowed the signal once more. One young technician looked completely confused. Is he reviewing the local wildlife? Another officer folded his arms. We expected distress calls. Instead, the room heard Ethan's cheerful voice. I've had worse meals at the Academy cafeteria. Silence followed. Finally, Commander Helios sighed. The human is making cooking videos. Back on NX 731. Ethan finished eating before storing the remaining fish inside a small cooling pit he had dug beside the stream. The afternoon sun was beginning to descend when he noticed movement near the shoreline. The same amphibious creature cautiously emerged from the water. Its silver eyes remained fixed on him. Neither moved, neither looked away. After several long seconds, Ethan slowly reached into his pack, removed a small piece of cooked fish, and tossed it several meters away. There, the creature immediately jumped backward. Its fins flared open. It sniffed the air suspiciously. Ethan remained seated. I'm not going to chase you. Several moments passed before the animal cautiously approached the fish. It sniffed once, grabbed the piece in its mouth, and retreated toward the water. Instead of swimming away, however, it sat near the shoreline and quietly ate while watching Ethan the entire time. Ethan smiled. So, we're observing each other. The strange little predator made a soft clicking sound, almost like an answer. For the next 3 days, an unusual routine developed. Every morning Ethan improved his shelter, gathered firewood, explored a little farther inland, and caught fish. Every afternoon the mysterious creature appeared. At first it stayed far away, then gradually closer. Sometimes it stole fish before Ethan could stop it. Sometimes it simply watched him. Occasionally Ethan deliberately tossed a smaller catch toward it. Little by little, the distance between them shrank. On the 5th day, Ethan looked at the animal sitting only a few meters away. You know, he said thoughtfully, I can't keep calling you the fish thief. The creature blinked. How about, He looked toward the gentle waves rolling against the rocks. Ripple. The animal tilted its head again. Ripple. This time its tail tapped the ground once. I'll take that as approval. From then on, Ethan found himself talking to Ripple throughout the day. You're late today. You already ate 2 fish. No, you can't have this one. Ripple never responded with words, of course, but its curious clicks, head tilts, and expressive eyes made it seem surprisingly attentive. One evening, Ethan was repairing the roof of his shelter when Ripple suddenly froze. Every fin along its back stood upright. Its ears flattened. A deep growl rumbled from its throat for the first time. Ethan immediately noticed the change. What is it? Ripple stared toward the open sea. Without warning, it sprinted toward Ethan, grabbed the sleeve of his jacket with its teeth, and pulled hard. Hey! The creature tugged again, much more urgently. You want me to move? Ripple released his sleeve only long enough to look toward the ocean before pulling again. Whatever had been peacefully watching Ethan for days was now visibly terrified. Trusting its instincts, Ethan quickly followed as Ripple dragged him higher up the rocky hillside overlooking the bay. The moment they reached the cliff, the calm ocean below exploded. A colossal shape burst from the water with a deafening roar. The creature was unlike anything Ethan had ever imagined. Its massive body stretched well over 50 meters long, covered in dark armored scales that reflected blue sunlight like polished metal. 6 enormous fins unfolded along its sides, each larger than the wings of a transport shuttle. Its jaws opened wide enough to swallow a hovercraft whole, revealing hundreds of curved crystalline teeth. Water cascaded from its body like waterfalls as it launched into the air before crashing back into the sea with a thunderous impact that shook the coastline. The enormous predator circled the bay once. Its glowing golden eyes swept across the shoreline. For one terrifying moment, Ethan was certain it had seen him. Instead, the giant beast slowly submerged beneath the waves until only ripples remained, as though nothing had happened. Ethan stood frozen, barely remembering to breathe. Ripple quietly pressed against his leg, still trembling. He looked down at the small creature, then back toward the now peaceful ocean. In a whisper, he said, I think, you just saved my life. Ethan and Ripple remained frozen on the rocky cliff long after the colossal sea creature disappeared beneath the waves. Neither of them made a sound. The only evidence that the monster had ever existed was the massive swell still rolling toward the shoreline. Ethan slowly exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. Okay, he whispered, forcing a shaky smile. I officially take back every nice thing I said about this planet. Ripple let out a soft clicking sound but refused to take its eyes off the ocean. Ethan knelt beside the young creature and gently scratched behind one of its folded fins. You warned me before it surfaced. Ripple relaxed slightly, though its body remained tense. Looks like I owe you more than a few fish now. That evening Ethan made an important decision. His campsite overlooking the beach was no longer safe. Even if the giant predator never came ashore, staying beside the bay meant living directly within its hunting grounds. He packed his equipment before sunset, carefully extinguished the fire, and looked back at the shelter he had spent days building. Sorry, he sighed. We're moving. Ripple watched curiously as Ethan shouldered his backpack. Come on, partner. The young creature hesitated for a moment before following him into the forest. It was the first time Ripple had willingly left the shoreline, and Ethan couldn't help smiling. Guess that makes us roommates now. The journey inland proved slower than expected. Dense vegetation covered the landscape, forcing Ethan to clear narrow paths through thick undergrowth using his survival knife. Strange vines climbed enormous trees whose trunks were wider than transport vehicles. Bright blue insects floated lazily through the air, while tiny mammals with feathered tails darted between moss-covered roots whenever Ethan approached. The forest wasn't hostile, but it demanded patience. Several times Ripple disappeared into the bushes only to return carrying unfamiliar fruits or sniffing suspiciously at unusual plants. Ethan never allowed himself to eat anything immediately. Instead, he collected samples and tested each one carefully using his survival scanner. Rule number 1. He reminded Ripple. Just because something looks edible doesn't mean it won't melt your stomach. Ripple tilted its head, then immediately spat out the strange berry it had been chewing. Ethan laughed. Good choice. After nearly 3 hours of hiking, they reached a high plateau overlooking both the ocean and the distant mountains. A freshwater stream flowed through the clearing before disappearing into the forest below. Large stone formations surrounded the area naturally, creating protection from wind while offering excellent visibility. Ethan slowly turned in a circle, studying every detail. Fresh water, higher elevation, natural cover. He nodded with satisfaction. This is better. Ripple wandered toward the stream, splashing happily into the shallow water before chasing tiny silver creatures that darted between the rocks. Watching the playful scene made Ethan forget, if only briefly, that he was stranded alone on the most feared planet in the galaxy. Over the next 2 days, Ethan transformed the clearing into a proper camp. He reinforced his shelter using flexible tree branches and broad waterproof leaves, constructed a raised sleeping platform to stay above damp ground, and built a stone fire pit designed to conceal smoke during windy weather. Ripple proved unexpectedly helpful. Although Ethan never gave formal commands, the young creature gradually began understanding simple requests. Need more branches, Ethan said one afternoon while tying support beams together. Ripple disappeared into the trees and returned dragging a long fallen limb nearly twice its own size. Ethan blinked in surprise. That's actually perfect. Ripple proudly wagged its tail. Don't look so pleased, Ethan chuckled. You're getting paid in fish. Each evening Ethan continued recording survival logs using Professor Barricks's recorder. Sitting beside the fire with Ripple curled nearby, he pressed the record button once again. Field log. Day 7. Relocated camp to higher ground after encountering what I can only describe as an ocean-sized nightmare. He glanced toward Ripple, who was chewing contentedly on a freshly caught fish. Good news is I seem to have acquired an assistant. Ripple looked up the moment it heard Ethan's voice. Meet Ripple. Ethan pointed the recorder toward the young beast. Professional bait thief, occasional lifesaver, terrible table manners. Ripple gave an annoyed chirp before grabbing another piece of fish and trotting away. Ethan laughed. Definitely terrible manners. Light years away, inside the Coalition Communications Center, technicians stared in stunned silence as another damaged transmission reached them. The image was distorted, but Ethan's cheerful expression remained visible. Meet Ripple. His voice crackled through the speakers. The blurry outline of the strange animal briefly appeared before static swallowed the picture. One officer frowned. Is that some kind of predator? Another slowly nodded. Looks like it. A younger technician blinked in disbelief. Then why is it eating dinner with him? Commander Helios rubbed his forehead. First fishing. Now he's making friends with alien wildlife. Nobody inside the room could decide whether the human was incredibly lucky or completely insane. The following morning Ethan decided it was finally time to explore beyond the immediate area surrounding the camp. After marking nearby landmarks with carefully carved symbols, he and Ripple followed the stream upstream toward the mountains. The farther they traveled, the stranger the landscape became. Trees gradually gave way to enormous fields of smooth black stone unlike any natural rock Ethan had ever seen. Some surfaces reflected sunlight almost like polished metal despite being partially buried beneath moss and soil. Ripple sniffed one of the formations before suddenly stepping backward with a low growl. You sense something? Ethan asked quietly. Ripple's ears flattened. The young creature refused to move any closer. Ethan cautiously approached the nearest stone and brushed away centuries of dirt with his glove. His heartbeat quickened. Perfectly straight lines appeared beneath the moss. Then geometric patterns. Then what looked unmistakably like carved symbols. This isn't natural. He cleared away more soil. A sharp metallic edge emerged beneath the surface. Ethan's eyes widened. This is a wall. Not a cliff. Not a boulder. A wall. Something enormous had once stood here. He slowly followed the buried structure through the forest until he reached a massive circular platform almost completely hidden beneath vines and vegetation. Giant pillars surrounded it, each engraved with symbols unlike any language recorded in Coalition databases. Many had collapsed long ago, yet their craftsmanship remained astonishingly precise. Ripple whimpered softly. Ethan looked around in complete silence. No expedition report mentioned ruins. He removed Professor Varrix's recorder and began filming. Field log. Day 8. I believe I've discovered evidence of an advanced civilization. He slowly turned the camera toward the towering pillars. These structures are ancient, far older than any colony. Weathering suggests they've been abandoned for thousands of years, possibly longer. As he stepped onto the center of the circular platform, the ground beneath his boots emitted a faint metallic hum. Ethan froze. Ripple barked sharply. A soft blue line suddenly illuminated beneath layers of dust. Then another, and another. Within seconds, glowing patterns spread across the entire platform like veins awakening after centuries of darkness. Deep beneath the earth, something responded. A low mechanical vibration rolled through the forest. Birds exploded into the sky. The ground trembled beneath Ethan's feet. Far below the ruins, hidden beneath rock and roots for untold ages, an ancient system that had slept for centuries quietly received its first confirmed signal from a living visitor, and began waking up.